Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Добрый вечер, уважаемые дамы и господа. My name is Елизавета Padalka. I am Professor of Clinical Virology of Ghent University and Ghent University Hospital. And on behalf of Russia platform of our university, I welcome you tonight on our online seminar and panel discussion assessing Sputnik-V vaccine. I'm accompanied tonight by professors of our university, Professor Hans Nauing, who is together with me moderator of this evening and will moderate the panel discussion in the second half of our seminar. And Professor Gert Leroux-Roels, a renowned vaccinologist in Belgium, who will give the first introductory talk of tonight. We are currently connected by direct connection by live stream with St. Petersburg, Russia, and we have speakers from St. Petersburg. We have speaker Professor Susanna Kharit from Pediatric University. Добрый вечер, уважаемая Сусанна Михайловна. And also Irina Levchenko, Dr. Irina Levchenko and Dr. Asatryan, they will join us later tonight in a live stream, also from St. Petersburg. Nowadays, many countries are on full speed during vaccination campaigns. And that's why we wanted to really highlight and talk more in detail about the mechanism and introduction of actually the first announced vaccine in the battle against COVID-19, and that was Sputnik-V. We heard about it already many months ago in the middle of last year, but actually, definitely here in Belgium, we don't know a lot about how it works, what mechanisms are behind other vaccines currently used in Russia against COVID-19. Do this vaccine look like the vaccines we know here in Belgium? And what is actually the strategy used in Russia to combat COVID-19 and to expand vaccination programs? First, I would like to give you some technical information. As announced, first we will have 3 presentations, and then we will have panel discussion. During panel discussion, you wouldn't be able to switch on your camera or your microphone, and so you have to send your questions by chat. You can do it just starting now, or during the presentation, or during panel discussion in the second half of this evening. Professor Hans Nauing will be a moderator of panel discussion. Of course, we will try to answer all the questions that we will receive, but don't be upset that particularly your question wouldn't be answered by the speakers. Another information that I want to provide you, that there will be synchronic translation of our interpreter and student of our university, Daria. That will be used during the presentation of Dr. Levchenko and Dr. Asatryan, and also, if needed, during panel discussion. You will be also able to follow delayed after the presentation. If you want to hear the presentations again of tonight, that will be on the channel of a Russia platform. And these presentations will be uploaded and available there during next week. So now I am very glad to give a word to Professor Gert Leroux-Roels, who will give a short introduction about how vaccines against COVID-19 work and where do we place Sputnik-V and also other Russian vaccines. Yes, please, Gert.
Thank you, Dr. Padalko. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As already said by Dr. Padalko, I was asked to, or I'm asked to give an introduction in order to position tonight's topic, which is the vaccines and the vaccine usage in Russia. But I will briefly introduce you to COVID vaccination in the following slides. And then there is no movement. Well, here you see a cartoon of a coronavirus, SARS coronavirus number 2, and the most prominent on this picture are the red knobs, which represent the S protein, which is crucial in the attachment of the virus to the host cell. Many cells in the human body have a particular receptor called the ACE2 receptor, to which the spike protein is binding. And this interaction between the S or spike protein and the receptor is the first step in viral infection, which is followed by viral entry, and then the viral replication starts and the whole disease development initiates. So it is crucial, if possible, to intervene in this critical reaction between the virus and host cell, meaning the S or spike protein and the ACE2 receptor. And this insert gives a detailed view of how intricate this interaction is, and mutations on the spike protein, of which we are learning a lot, have an impact or may have an impact on the strength of this interaction on the one hand, and possible interaction or non-interaction of human antibodies against this spike protein. Now, the main goal of all the vaccines we have available and we are studying today is to block the interaction between the spike protein, which you see on the viral particle on the left-hand side, and the human cell, most predominantly cells in the upper airways. So by inducing antibodies that bind to the spike protein, you are able to block the binding of the virus and to prevent disease. That's, in fact, the holy grail in the whole vaccine development. Again, this picture of the interaction. So if you intervene in blocking the binding between the purple colored spike protein and the receptor, you may block or stop or prevent viral binding and entry and disease. Now, what is expected from a vaccine, and in fact from most or all vaccines? Well, again, what I emphasized a minute ago is to induce antibodies that bind, that interact in a strong and specific manner with the spike protein, and in particular with that region that is most critical for the interaction between the spike protein and the ACE2 receptor. So as the more of this type of antibodies you're able to induce, the better a vaccine may work. But in order to have antibodies produced, you need to activate the antibody-producing cells, and these are called B cells. They reside in many places in the body, in lymph nodes, in the bone marrow. They circulate in the blood, and they are able to produce antibodies if they receive the appropriate helper signals from another population of lymphocytes called the T cells. So in order to produce antibodies, a variety of cells needs to be activated to ultimately end up with high-titered specific antibodies. In addition, or ideally, you activate, or vaccines activate, one more type of lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, called the cytotoxic T lymphocyte, abbreviated CTL, and that's another type of protective cells which are able to recognize infected cells and upon recognition are able to kill the cells in which the virus is replicating, is being creating offspring. And ultimately, you want your vaccine to leave a permanent footprint in the body, and this is depicted in the upper right panel where you see a series of memory cells, memory B cells, memory helper cells, and memory CTL cells, which will remain in the body months, hopefully years after the vaccine has been administered, and these cells are able to immediately react upon a new contact with the virus. So this memory compartment is also very important, and the more and the stronger you can expand this memory pool, the better you're protected in the long run against corona infection and disease. There are a variety of strategies to achieve that goal, and the goals I mentioned, antibodies, B cells, helper cells, and CTL cells. And well, represented in a clockwise manner, you see 7 strategies. On a clock between hour 10 and 5, you have the more traditional approaches being represented, and from 10, 11 o'clock you have inactivated virus, and I have difficulty to see this, but you have live attenuated virus, viral proteins, recombinant proteins as vaccines. Novel strategies, which are very much used in the context now of corona vaccine development, are the ones depicted between 5 o'clock on the cartoon and 10 o'clock. The lower segment, between 5 and 7, represents the adenoviral vectors, and then the final 2, around 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, are RNA vectored vaccines and DNA vectored vaccines. I will not talk about all of them, but I highlight those that are being used in the Russian vaccines, and you will hear a lot more about it. On the one hand, the Covivac vaccine developed by the Shumakov Center in St. Petersburg is the one you find at 11 o'clock on the clock, upper left. Then you have a vaccine at around 3 o'clock in the group of protein vaccines, but I'm talking about the APIVAC corona vaccines developed by Vector Institute in Novosibirsk. That's a peptide vaccine. And finally, the one we know best in the West is the Sputnik vaccine, which is using adenoviral vectors to produce a useful and a strong vaccine. More of this in a few minutes. Just to tell you this slide that vaccine development and research is still ongoing, and for the time being, 133 vaccines are being tested in humans in different phases of vaccine development, phase 1 up to the licensed vaccines, of which there are 8, and another 8 are authorized vaccines. Overall, a lot of candidates still in the pipeline. And then finally, vaccines that are in very advanced phase of development. I will not name them all. You will see them on the slide if you look back at it. But the one in the frame is the Gamaleya vaccine based on adenoviral vectors, and on which the speakers will give you a lot more detailed information in the rest of this presentation. So I hope this allows you to follow what will be explained in the next 45 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Leroux-Roels, for the introduction and bringing us in vaccine mood against COVID-19. If you have already questions to Professor Leroux-Roels, please put them in a chat. Don't wait until the panel discussion. And now, after the introductory part, we go live to St. Petersburg to Professor Kharit from Pediatric University. Professor Kharit will explain to us the rich history of Russia in vaccination, as well as legislation and routine basic vaccination used, and focus specifically on vaccines against COVID-19, of course, the most known one in Belgium and Western world, Sputnik-V, but also the ones introduced by Professor Leroux-Roels and more detailed presented by Professor Kharit, Epivac, Corona, and Kovac. Yeah? So thank you very much, Professor Kharit, for joining us. Вам слово, Сусанна Михайловна.
Спасибо большое, Елизавета. Сейчас я поделюсь экраном.
Вас хорошо слышно?
Видно презентацию?
Нет еще?
Поделиться. Я поделилась. Открываю. Так, видно?
Нет еще?
Ну, может быть, там техническая поддержка тогда мне как-то поможет.
Share screen, yeah.
Yeah, share screen. Can we have a technical support for share screen, please?
Oh, they try now. Right.
Выберите часть экрана. Поделиться. Поделиться и открыть.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Так, видно?
Сусанна Михайловна, все видно. Спасибо большое. Да.
Хорошо, спасибо. Dear colleagues, my English is not very well, and if it's possible, I will speak in Russian. Для начала я просто немножечко расскажу о структуре вакцинопрофилактики в Российской Федерации.
First of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about vaccination in Russia.
Вакцинопрофилактика у нас осуществляется на основании закона об иммунопрофилактике
It's
инфекционных
implemented
заболеваний.
based on the law on immunology of infectious diseases.
Этот закон включает два календаря
This law
прививок. Национальный календарь
includes
прививок
two national calendars, the national one
и календарь прививок по эпидемическим показаниям.
and the calendar for
различаются.
medical prescriptions.
Not medical, but epidemic indication. Отличаются они по финансовому сопровождению, потому что национальный календарь обеспечивается государством, и он бесплатен для всех граждан. А календарь по ЭПИД-показаниям – это
The schedules are being
реализация.
supported by the government.
А календарь по ЭПИД-показаниям реализуется в регионах за счет средств регионов или за счет средств самих граждан.
Kun je daar alsjeblieft luider maken? Ik kan mezelf horen.
У нас нет обязательной вакцинации,
We don't have
но
obligatory vaccination.
календарь предусматривает права и обязанности как врача, так и пациента в плане реализации прививок. И сам календарь прививок, он уже определяется Министерством здравоохранения.
And the calendar is defined by the Ministry of Health.
Министерство здравоохранения не только формирует календарь прививок и
The Ministry
поставляет
of
вакцины
Health
в рамках
of Russia doesn't only define vaccination, but also provides the
поставляет
distribution.
вакцины, и также контролирует проведение иммунизации, то есть
And
уровень
controls the
привитости
process
населения.
of immunization, meaning how many people are vaccinated.
Еще две организации участвуют в проведении организации и контроля вакцинации. Это Роспотребнадзор
There are
и
another
Росздравнадзор.
two organizations that take part in vaccination. These are Rospotrebnadzor and Roszdravnadzor.
И в их задачи, в частности, входит контроль качества вакцин,
They have to control the quality of vaccines,
соблюдение холодовой цепи и правильность проведения иммунизации на месте.
as well as immunization at the local level and keeping the quality control.
Здесь представлен наш национальный календарь прививок,
Here
который
you
был
can see
принят в
our national
2014
schedule
году.
introduced in
Вакцинация эта
2014.
осуществляется для всех детей нашей страны бесплатно и для
This
взрослых,
vaccination is
там,
free
где,
for all children in our country as well as for adults,
в рамках этого календаря. По
according to this
эпидпоказаниям,
schedule.
по эпидпоказаниям рекомендуется профилактика, как вы видите, ветряной оспы, ротавирусной инфекции,
As you can
гемофильной
see,
инфекции ТБ.
there are vaccines against chickenpox, rotavirus infection, hemophilic infection, pneumococcal infection.
И с 2000 года в календарь по эпидпоказаниям была введена
And since
вакцинация против
2020,
коронавирусной
we've
инфекции
included vaccination against COVID-19
для взрослых старше 18 лет.
for adults from 18 years old.
Кроме того, входит огромный перечень других
Moreover,
инфекций,
there are plenty of other
осуществляемых
different infections which we vaccinate against.
for epidemic indication. Так выглядит наш календарь прививок, и в частности тот
This is
раздел,
our
который
schedule,
посвящен
and mainly the part dedicated to
профилактике коронавирусной инфекции.
to
Здесь
vaccination
были
against
перечислены
coronavirus.
те группы людей, которые относятся к
Here
приоритетным в
we've
плане
included
вакцинации.
those groups of people who are in priority for vaccination,
Как по профессиональным особенностям, это медики, это учителя,
taking into account their profession,
работающие
for instance, medical staff,
в системе
teachers,
образования,
working in
так
this
и,
educational sphere,
так и ко второму уровню приоритета были отнесены люди,
as well
работающие
as
по другим профессиям.
people
Это
of different
обеспечивающие
occupations.
жизнедеятельность государства, транспорт,
For instance, those
энергия,
people who
правоохранительные органы,
work
военнослужащие.
transport or the army.
И параллельно с этим была рекомендована вакцинация людям с
And at the
различными
same time, the
серьезными
vaccination was recommended
заболеваниями.
for people with serious diseases.
Вакцины, которые включаются в национальный календарь прививок,
The vaccines that are included in the national schedule,
или те, которые поставляет государство, как сейчас это
or
коронавирусная
distributed
вакцина,
by the government, now it's the COVID-19
централизованно
vaccine,
поставляются в каждый регион
is distributed to every region of the country,
и внутри региона распределяются по медицинским учреждениям.
and within the region distributed within medical institutions.
Medical institutions, and I don't sure that it is correctly. It's ambulance, поликлиника, по поликлиникам.
Yeah,
Где и
outpatient
осуществляется
departments,
вакцинация.
hospitals, outpatient departments, where the vaccination is implemented.
Вакцины, включенные в национальный календарь прививок, они
Vaccines
отвечают
included
одному
in the
очень
national
важному
schedule
требованию. Это
should correspond to one very important condition.
это должны быть или отечественное производство,
Those should be domestic vaccines,
или это локализованное производство в Российской Федерации вакцин других производителей.
or it should be produced locally in Russia.
Вакцины против коронавирусной инфекции, как уже было сказано,
Vaccines
на
against
сегодня
COVID-19, as it has been said, today are used.
Реально используются три вакцины.
Three
Это
vaccines are used
Sputnik,
today. This is Sputnik-V,
Epivac Corona и Covivac.
Epivac Corona, and Covivac.
На сегодня в стадии разработки как минимум еще две вакцины, которые
As
уже
of
близки к
today, two
клиническим
vaccines are being
исследованиям.
developed, and they are close to clinical experiments.
том числе одна из них интраназальная.
and one of them is intranasal.
Спутник-V это типичная вакцина на основе аденовирусного вектора.
Sputnik-V is a typical vaccine based on adenovirus vaccine.
Лишенный генов репликации, это не реплицирующаяся
There are
вакцина.
no replication genes in it.
И использовано два разных варианта аденовируса
Two
для
different strains of adenovirus is used
того, чтобы не усилить специфический иммунный ответ, который бы
not to make
не
immune
купировался
reactions stronger,
чтобы он не купировался антителами к самому аденовирусу.
so that
Чтобы он
antibodies are not sticked to the agent.
Наши исследователи предполагали, что если при первичной вакцинации
Initially, our researchers thought that if during the initial vaccination the patient gets antibodies
к 26-му вирусу, то это
against the type 26, then at the second period of vaccination,
бустеризация.
it, it will
Вакцины это помешает
stop the booster effect.
оба вектора несут полноразмерный гликопротеин гена S.
Both vectors include
И
glycoprotein
думаю, что
gene
это
S,
поскольку написано
and
вакцина
you can see it on the slide.
назначается дважды с интервалом 3 недели и хранится при
It's
температуре минус 20
should
градусов.
be injected 2 times and should be kept at the temperature of 20 degrees
Размораживается непосредственно перед введением.
and defreezed just before the vaccination.
Результаты первой, второй и третьей фазы были опубликованы.
The results of the first, second, and third phases of clinical trials are published in Lancet.
Результаты этого исследования, они же включены в инструкцию к вакцине.
And the results of this research are stated in the instruction of the vaccine.
Как вы видите, при клинических исследованиях была проведена
As you can see, during clinical trials, the randomization was 3-1.
И данные по безопасности и реактивности были, а также по эффективности, были оценены практически по анализу 22 тысяч привитых.
And this data was analyzed according to the data that we got after vaccinating almost 22,000 adults.
Вакцина показала эффективность по предупреждению
The vaccine was effective in preventing hospitalization,
тяжелых форм и летальных исходов
serious forms of the illness, and lethal cases.
практически 92%.
Almost 92% of cases.
И в 95%,
And in 95% of cases,
отмечается сероконверсия второго введения.
the seroconversion is
After second
is
dose of
noticed.
vaccine. Если сравнивать эффективность вакцины
If we compare the effectivity of the vaccine in comparison with other vaccines against adenovirus,
то она показала значительно большую эффективность,
we can see that the effectiveness is higher
AstraZeneca и вакцина
than vaccines AstraZeneca and Johnson Johnson.
Здесь вы видите сравнение с вакциной
Here you can see the comparison with the Johnson Johnson vaccine.
Правда, надо отметить, что эта вакцина
But we should take into account that this vaccine is being implemented only one time.
И здесь вы видите данные по эффективности.
And here you can see the data about the effectiveness of the vaccine AstraZeneca.
Данные, которые тоже опубликованы в Lancet.
The data which is also published in Lancet.
Если говорить о иммунитете, который проверялся по отношению к штамму,
When it comes to immune response to the beta strain,
то данные практически такие же, как и по отношению к
the data is the same as in relation to the main
коронавирусу.
strain.
В отношении безопасности вакцины «Спутник»
When it comes to the safety of the Sputnik vaccine, according to clinical trials,
отмечена достаточно невысокая реактогенность, не превышающая
we see that common vaccine reaction doesn't exceed 30% when it comes to local reactions,
и практически такое же количество общих реакций.
and the same amount of general common reactions.
Реакции развиваются в основном в первые трое суток после введения вакцины.
The reactions come up mainly on the second or the third day after the vaccination.
Именно по анализу небольшого количества моих коллег
And according to the analysis of some of my vaccines and their reaction to the vaccine,
вы видите, что сильные температурные реакции отмечались примерно в 3% случаев.
you can see that the fever is the case in 1/3 of cases.
Это фева выше 38,6.
Yeah, a little bit more than 1/3. The fever more than 38 and 5 degrees.
Помимо общих проявлений в виде лихорадки и интоксикации,
Intoxications and fever are one of the symptoms, but there are more.
отмечались в определенном количестве случаев различные другие проявления.
In some cases, there were other symptoms such as headache,
Головокружение, озноб,
dizziness, feeling of fever,
слабость,
weakness,
боли в суставах,
pain in bones,
боль в грудной клетке,
in the chest.
в единичных случаях снижение обоняния,
Quite rarely, people can't smell that well.
и проявления со стороны желудочно-кишечного тракта в виде тошноты и диареи.
And sometimes also feeling of diarrhea and vomiting.
Симптоматика сохранялась на протяжении 2-3 дней.
The symptoms were there during 2 or 3 days,
И в дальнейшем никаких жалоб.
and later there were no complaints.
На второе введение вакцины
After the second vaccination, some symptoms
чаще, чем на первое введение.
were present more often than during the first vaccination.
Для того, чтобы более наглядно взрослым людям объяснить, что появляющиеся
In order to
симптомы
explain to adults that the symptoms
не очень серьезны, мы сравнили
are not very
сочетание
serious, we compared it with the reactions
у детей, получающих цельноклеточную
with children who get the vaccine against the whooping cough.
Ну, здесь акцент именно на том, что это цельноклеточная вакцина, потому что она более реактогенна, чем бесклеточная.
And here it's important.
Не просто как вакцинацию против коклюша.
It's important to point out that it's a whole cell vaccine, not a no cell vaccine.
Thank you. И в данном случае мы продемонстрировали, что частота
And here we
этих реакций
demonstrated that the frequency of this reaction is not higher than with children.
Ну, реакция на публикации в Lancet были тоже в виде, как вы видите, статей.
There were different reactions to the publication Lancet, mainly articles which confirmed the quality of the vaccine.
И на сегодняшний день достаточно большое количество
As of today,
стран
a lot of countries
используют данную вакцину.
use this vaccine.
Вторая вакцина, которая была зарегистрирована,
The second registered vaccine and used today as well.
пока,
Not that often by now.
ну, если говорить о Санкт-Петербурге, то
But speaking of St. Petersburg, today
более 650 тысяч
more
человек
6,100 people are vaccinated 2 times already. 650,000 people.
И в основном это вакцина Sputnik.
And mainly it's the Sputnik-V vaccine.
Около 19 тысяч доз использовано
About
вакцины.
19,000 doses are from Epivac corona vaccine.
На сегодня не зарегистрировано серьезных нежелательных явлений ни на одной из животных.
There are no serious adverse events in relation to any of these 2 vaccines
В Санкт-Петербурге.
in St. Petersburg.
По результатам исследования ПИВА корона была опубликована
According to the results of the research, Epivac corona, an article was
в
published
российском журнале
in the Russian journal
«Инфекция и иммунитет».
Infections and Immunity. This article is published in English.
Представлены данные по протеинах, которые включены.
Here you can find the information about proteins that are included in the vaccine.
И представлены результаты по безопасности и эффективности
And here you can see the results about safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine
волонтеров, включенных в первую и вторую фазу исследования.
with 68 volunteers who took part in the first and the second clinical trial.
Здесь вы можете видеть данные по
Here you can see the data
реакциям, как местным, так и общим.
on the local and systematic reactions.
Вакцина существенно менее реактогенна.
The vaccine
Векторной вакциной.
induces much less reactions.
Для данной вакцины на сегодня описан только уровень сероконверсии.
And the level of seroconversion is described in relation to this vaccine. This is the only data.
Данные по эпидемиологической и клинической эффективности пока еще не опубликованы.
The data on epidemiologic and clinical effectiveness are not published by now.
И третья вакцина, которую мы также сегодня
And the third vaccine that we use today
Covivac, это
is Covivac.
стандартная убитая вакцина.
It is a standard vaccine in Russia.
Нет, не Russian, standard Russian, это standard inactivated vaccine. Это стандартная инактивированная вакцина.
Standard inactivated vaccine.
Is the same as Sinovac and аналогично Sinovac и аналогично китайской вакцине, вторую забыла название.
This is an analog to the Chinese vaccine and another vaccine, which is registered in the World Health Organization.
Вакцина содержит гидроксид алюминия в качестве адъюванта.
The vaccine contains aluminum hydroxide.
И данные по этой вакцине также на сегодняшний день еще по ее эффективности клинической.
And the data about the effectiveness of this vaccine haven't been published.
Вакцина также и эпивак корона и ковивак используются двукратно.
Covivac vaccine is used 2 times. There are 2 phases of vaccination.
Преимуществом эпивак корона и ковивак
The advantage of Epivac and Covivac vaccines
не требует замораживания.
is that they don't have to be frozen.
Вакцины разрешены для использования у лиц старше 18 лет.
It allows to use all the 3 vaccines with people of age.
Вакцина Спутник не имеет верхнего ограничения возрастного.
The Sputnik vaccine can be used at all ages after 18 years old.
Вакцины Эпивак и Ковивак только до 60 лет.
Epivac and Covivac vaccines can be used only until 60 years old.
Данные на вакцину Спутник представлены во Всемирной организации здравоохранения.
The data on the Sputnik vaccine are presented in the World Health Organization.
В настоящее время проводится дополнительный анализ документов.
Today there is an extra analysis of the documents and the production of the vaccine.
Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you for your attention.
Огромное спасибо вам, Сусанна Михайловна, за презентацию. Thank you very much, Professor Kharit, for your presentation and giving us here insight in history and basic vaccinations used in Russia, as well as regulatory legislation and vaccines against COVID-19. Now we go to St. Petersburg again. And we go to Dr. Levchenko and Dr. Asatryan. They are practical infectious disease specialists and also administrative vice director, Dr. Levchenko, of an outpatient clinic in St. Petersburg. And they will give us a very practical, their own experience about how the vaccination is going on in their outpatient clinic. Рада вас видеть, Ирина Леонидовна и Асмик Георгиевна. Пожалуйста, вам слово.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon.
Максим, выведи мне презентацию на экран.
Сейчас, секунду.
Мы видим вашу презентацию и слышим вас хорошо.
Добрый день еще раз.
Good
Я
afternoon
хочу
once again.
представить доклад, который мы
I want to
совместно
present a
с
report that we've drawn up together
готовили
with
по
Asmik
опыту
Asatryan
проведения вакцинации против COVID-19
on the
в
vaccination experience in an outpatient department number 88 in St. Petersburg.
Главная задача
The main task
которая стоит перед
The main task
нашим
that
учреждением и другими
our
учреждениями
healthcare institution
здравоохранения
has and other institutions in Russia
это провести массовую иммунизацию взрослого населения.
is to immunize all the adult population.
Для того, чтобы выполнить эту задачу, необходимо
And to
соблюдение
implement this
следующих
task,
условий.
there are several conditions that are required.
Первое, нужно иметь в
First of
наличии
all,
нормативное
we should
регулирование,
have regulations.
наличие эффективных вакцин,
Secondly, vaccines.
информирование общества и, как следствие,
Also, we should
формирование
inform the
доверия в
public
обществе,
and build their trust.
и совершенствование инфраструктуры
And
обеспечения
last but not
вакцинацией.
least, improve the infrastructure for providing vaccination.
Мы понимаем, что только массовая вакцинация
We
позволит взять
realize
под
that
контроль
only mass
эпидемическую ситуацию в стране.
immunization will allow us to control the epidemiological situation in the country.
Что касается нормативного регулирования,
Let me
то
say a few words
оно
about the
включает в себя два
regulations.
уровня.
It includes two levels.
Первый уровень – это
The
разработка и
first one,
утверждение федеральных
development and
рекомендаций
approval of federal guidelines,
и внедрение федеральных рекомендаций на
and
локальном уровне.
implementation of those guidelines locally.
А именно реорганизация работы внутри
Mainly,
учреждения и
we need
создание
to
внутренних
reorganize the institutional agenda and draw up internal protocols.
Относительно разработки федеральных рекомендаций,
Now, a few words
в
about
конце
federal guidelines.
2020 года
In the year of
Министерство
2020,
здравоохранения
the Ministry of
выдало
Health
внесение в
has
национальный календарь профилактических
changed the
прививок
national
по
immunization schedule,
показаниям. В национальный календарь была внесена вакцинация против
and
COVID-19.
since then, COVID vaccination has been included in the schedule.
Тем самым вакцинацию против COVID-19 взяла
Consequently, the
на себя.
government has covered all the costs for the vaccination.
Также были разработаны методические рекомендации по использованию.
We've also developed special recommendations for all the types of the vaccine
Методические рекомендации по выездной вакцинации.
and recommendation for vaccination at local level, mobile vaccination.
Немного хотим рассказать о работе нашей поликлиники.
And now let me tell you a little bit about the work of our outpatient department.
Наша поликлиника включает в себя 6 отделений,
Our clinic includes 6 units,
2 поликлиники для взрослых,
2 units for adults,
2 поликлиники для детей,
2 units for children,
женская
a
консультация
women's clinic,
и отделение скорой и неотложной медицинской
and an
помощи.
emergency unit.
Общее количество обслуживаемого взрослого населения
The clinic serves
нашей поликлиникой составляет 116 843 человека.
116,843 43 adults.
У нас работают 269 докторов,
269 doctors are employed,
из них 73 участковых,
namely 73 district doctors,
196
196 specialists,
и в штате нашего учреждения 338
as well as 338 nurses.
Существуют в нашем учреждении следующие способы записи на
There are
вакцинацию.
several ways to sign up for the vaccination,
Через единую телефонную линию,
either through a single telephone line, 122,
через портал государственных
or
услуг,
via the site of state services,
через портал здоровья
via the
Петербурга
site Health of a St. Petersburger,
и при непосредственном обращении в поликлинику.
or personally when coming to the clinic.
Необходимым условием успешного проведения вакцинации против COVID-19
One of the important
является
conditions
реорганизация работы
is
учреждения.
to reorganize the institution.
При проведении рутинной вакцинации
In routine practice,
перед вакцинацией проводится осмотр пациента.
before the vaccination, the patient is examined by the doctor.
Пациент подписывает добровольное информирование
The
на
patient
согласие
signs an informed consent
и получает доступ к вакцинации.
and gets access to vaccination.
При проведении вакцинации против COVID-19
In case of COVID-19 vaccination,
пациентам заполняется короткая анкета,
the patient fills in a short form.
проводится беседа врача с пациентом,
There is a examination by the physician,
осмотр пациента.
the conversation with the doctor.
Данные осмотра оформляются на определенном
And the
бланке.
results of the examination are recorded in a special form.
Также пациентам подписывается добровольное информированное
The patient
согласие,
also signs an informed consent,
и выдается памятка с информацией
and gets a
о
special
вакцине,
booklet about the information on the vaccine,
побочных явлениях
possible
поствакцинальный период,
complications after the vaccination,
первой помощи и других рекомендаций.
first aid and other recommendations.
Обязательно при допуске пациента до первого этапа вакцинации
It's also obligatory during the first phase of vaccination
пациенту выдается талон на второй этап вакцинации.
that the patient gets a coupon for the second visit. Вы можете меня, вы можете просто говорить, не обращать на меня внимания, если вам так удобнее.
Какие еще отличия существуют
What are
в
other
рутинной
differences between the routine
вакцинации и
practice and
вакцинации против
vaccination
COVID-19?
against COVID-19?
Непосредственное введение препарата при рутинной
In
вакцинации
routine practice,
осуществляется
the vaccine
медицинская
is
сестра.
performed by a certified nurse.
В случае вакцинации COVID-19
When it comes to COVID vaccination, the vaccination can be performed by a special ad hoc trained nurse.
Как и при рутинной вакцинации, так и после вакцинации COVID-19
In both in
пациент в
routine
течение
practice and in
30
vaccination
минут
against COVID, the
находится
patient
под
during 30
наблюдением
minutes
медицинских
is
работников
followed by the medical
в
staff,
непосредственной
is
близости
examined
от
by the staff.
прививочного кабинета.
Mainly the patients are waiting next to the vaccination room.
Также есть отличия по регистрации.
There is also difference in registration and recording of the vaccination. In routine practice, the data is recording in a special certificate,
прививочную картотеку
and
нашего учреждения.
in the local vaccination database of our clinic. In case of COVID vaccination, the data is recorded in a special federal database of vaccinated against COVID-19.
Что касается регистрации нежелательных явлений,
A few words about the recording of adverse events. In routine practice,
врач при непосредственном обращении пациента
the adverse events are recorded by the doctor when the patient comes to the clinic.
После проведения вакцинации COVID-19
After COVID-19 vaccination, the patient or their representatives can report their claims in a special reporting system in the unified Russian database of vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus.
Перед началом прививочной кампании против COVID-19
Before the vaccination, our clinic analyzed our capacity and sources. We defined tasks and distributed the responsibilities. It's peculiar that we faced a higher, a more time-consuming procedures for doctors as well as for patients. Our task was to vaccinate as many people as it possible in a short period of time. and consequently, the staff workload was higher.
Перед началом вакцинации нам необходимо
Before
было
the vaccination,
оборудовать пункты
we had to
вакцинации
equip
во
immunization
взрослых
offices in adults units
обучить и подготовить дополнительные
to
кадры для
train
проведения
extra staff for vaccination,
изменить режим работы кабинетов
to
вакцинации,
change the schedule of
приобрести
vaccination offices,
дополнительное морозильное и холодильное оборудование,
to purchase extra freezers and refrigerators,
регистрации и создать
to
выездные
provide operational registrations and create mobile teams for vaccination.
В нашей клинике были созданы простые, адаптированные к условиям работы
Our clinic introduced simple and effective algorithms and protocols for doctors and nurses.
Был проведен инструктаж и обучение. Были
We
обучены
have
6
trained the
докторов,
medical staff, namely 6 doctors and 9 nurses,
определена персональная ответственность и конкретные
and defined special responsibilities and specific tasks for the medical staff.
Что мы сделали конкретно? Мы выделили
These
специальные
are
кабинеты для
the
осмотра
steps that we've taken.
на
We've provided
первичном
extra
отделе
rooms
и отдельно на повторном
separately for
вакцинации.
first and second vaccinations.
Разделили потоки пациентов,
We've separated patient flows
получающих первой вакцинации и второй
for first and second vaccination.
Создали наглядные инструкции,
We've drawn up
наглядную
visual
маршрутизацию
instructions,
наших
maps for patients in the clinic so that they can find their way.
информационные материалы, видеоролики,
We've introduced some materials, videos,
ресурсов для размещения
quotes
на
from
сайте.
official sources and posted it on the site
Также
of the
для
clinic.
персонала был создан специальный файл общедоступный.
Also, the medical staff got a special file with guidelines for doctors and nurses.
В результате проведенной реорганизации мы
As a
имеем
result,
2 пункта вакцинации
we have
с
2
режимом работы с
vaccination
7
offices
утра до 8
working from
вечера
8 a.m. till
каждый
8
день,
p.m.
без
They work
выходных
every
и
day
праздников.
without weekends.
В результате того, что были разведены потоки пациентов на первую и вторую вакцинацию,
We've
разделен
separated patient flows for
персонал,
first and second
который
vaccinations,
обеспечивает допуск с
and
первой вакцинации ко второй
the staff was
вакцинации.
also separated.
Уменьшилось время, потраченное на допуск пациента к
And the
вакцинации.
time that we spent
Чего
on waiting
мы
is
добились?
decreased as well.
За меньшее количество рабочих часов мы прививаем большее количество
Therefore,
человек.
in lesser amount of hours, we
В
vaccinate more
результате
people.
чего освободилось время для проведения выездной вакцинации,
As a result, we have more time
при
to
которой в
vaccinate
сутки мы прививаем от 60
in a mobile
до
mode,
80 человек.
and we have an extra vaccination of 60 to 80 people per day.
В нашей поликлинике мы имеем 3 вида вакцин.
Our department has 3 types of vaccines: Sputnik-V, Epivac Corona, and Covivac.
Первая партия вакцин
The first batch of vaccines was delivered to our clinic on the 31st of December 2020.
Важный этап проведения вакцинации – это информирование
An important
населения.
phase is informing the public.
Мы информируем население путем размещения информационных
We
материалов
inform the
на
public by
сайте
publishing
нашей
related
поликлиники.
information on the
Организуем
website of
горячие
the clinic.
линии
We
пациентам.
set up hotlines with the patients.
У нас действует на сайте постоянно действующее окно
On the
вопросы-ответы.
site we have a permanent Q&A section.
Мы устраиваем встречи с
We
заинтересованными
organize
пациентами
meetings with patients who want to come,
и консультируем каждого пациента, кто обращается
and
в
we
наш
provide
клиник.
consultations for all the patients that come to our clinic.
При информировании населения мы руководствуемся принципами этики.
When informing the public, we have several important principles.
Мы уважаем автономию личности и достоинство человека.
We respect the dignity and autonomy. All the decisions should be taken voluntarily.
соотношение риск-польза.
and the relation
Мы
between
за
risk and
добровольную
benefit should be optimal.
вакцинацию, но
We support
объясняем
voluntary
каждому пациенту,
vaccination, but we
что
explain
только
to every
массовая
patient
вакцинация поможет
that only mass
справиться
vaccination
с
can
сложившейся
help
ситуацией
to cope
пандемии.
with the problem.
На данную дату в нашей поликлинике привито уже более
As of
14
today,
тысяч
more than
человек.
14,000 people have been vaccinated.
Более 50% привитых пациентов это
More
пациенты
than
старше
the
60
half are older than 60 years old.
Примерно 10% привитых
About
пациентов
10% of the
в возрасте
patients
от 18 до
are
35 лет
18 to 35 years of age,
и около 40%
and about
пациентов в
40%
возрасте от 35
are
до
35 to
59 лет.
59 years of age.
В настоящее время отмечается рост удельного веса более молодых людей,
Now we have more young people who get the vaccine,
что нас очень радует.
and it's of course good news.
Ежедневно всеми мерами мы
Every
пытаемся
day
бороться
we
с
do our
оспадными
best
рисками,
to
увеличить
increase
удельный
vaccination
вес
coverage,
молодых людей
and
среди
more
вакцинированных.
specifically among the young.
Завершить наш доклад я
And
хочу
I'd like to finish my report by quoting an American inventor, Charles Franklin Ketting. We should all be concerned about our future because we will have to spend the rest of our lives there. Let me also express my gratitude to Professor Olga Kuber and Oksana Lapukhina for their assistance in preparing the report. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levchenko and also Dr. Asatryan for preparing and for presenting your very practical insight, how you actually in practice in the routine in an outpatient clinic in St. Petersburg combat COVID-19 and advocate for vaccination. Огромное вам спасибо, Ирина Леонидовна и Асмик Георгиевна, за презентацию очень интересного доклада и за его подготовку. I have to say that it's still possible to put your questions to all our speakers tonight in a chat. And now I will give word to my colleague, Professor Nawin, who will moderate the panel discussion of this evening.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you, Lisa, for moderating everything. I think we can start with the panel discussion, and we have, of course, we heard three brilliant presentations. First of all, from Kharit, giving some background information on the vaccines that are used worldwide and the way they work. I think that was nicely presented. And also, I would like to thank Susanna for giving us insights in the Russian vaccines. Thank you very much. It was very clear to us, what you do, what they are. Also inside information on the efficacy and the safety. And Irina, I also really appreciate what you demonstrated, because this is also extremely important. It's not only important to make vaccines, but I think the most important thing is to try to get it into the people. Stimulating, activating the people to get vaccinated. So we had very beautiful presentations, and I think we can go now over the different speakers to have some discussions. And of course, I always start with some warm-up questions to get everybody activated. And I would like to have a question for Kharit. We had, in 2019, SARS-CoV-2 came up from China. That was a certain genetic type. That was the basis for the vaccine development for most of the vaccine producers. So at this moment, we hear a lot about the different variants. We have the British, the South African, Brazilian, then also now more the Indian. So there are different variants. And my question is, why are vaccine producers so afraid of the emergence of those variants? What is the reason for that?
The reason for that relates to what I tried to show in one of the first slides. The variation in the most critical area, the so-called receptor binding domain, certainly have an impact on, or a possible impact on, how well the vaccine-induced antibodies are binding to the viral spike protein. If the antibodies induced by a vaccine are no longer able to bind to the variant spike protein, you have a major problem. And as you mentioned, we are now faced with an kind of follow-up of variants. You name them by the country or the region of isolation. We now have to call them according to the Greek alphabet. You have the original strain coming from Wuhan, and then we are confronted with alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. As we are still most familiar with the local names, the British variant seems to be pretty well recognized and neutralized by the present vaccines. The South African variant, or the beta variant, is more of a concern because depending on the vaccine, you see diminished efficacy. For example, the Johnson and Johnson vaccine was shown to be much less effective in South Africa and was no longer used in that country for that reason. So the concern of the global population and of virologists, vaccine producers in particular, is a failure of vaccine efficacy. And this is monitored very closely and relates to a few amino acid changes in this so-called receptor binding region. What has also been observed is that certain other amino acid variations in the receptor binding region are increasing the capacity of the virus to bind and to cause disease more easily. So the concern is not only focused on vaccine efficacy, but also on the pathogenicity of the virus. So this whole variant story is monitored very closely.
Yes. What I'm always surprised of is that people always talk about antibodies, and they always forget to mention you mentioned the CTL, the cytotoxic T lymphocyte, which is, I believe, I'm a veterinarian, is an important cell type. So they always mention the humoral immunity. Imagine that you have no neutralization anymore by a variant. Could those cytotoxic T lymphocytes still do something, or?
Yeah, it's very much likely that the CTL, so the cytotoxic T lymphocytes, on the one hand, and possibly also the T helper cells, contribute to the protection against disease severity. For reasons I hopefully explained a little bit in the introduction. The interaction between the virus with its spike protein and the host cell is really a matter of binding and blocking of the binding. But once the virus gets inside cells, T helper cells and certainly cytotoxic T cells play a role in determining the severity of disease, and they will certainly contribute to our long-lasting immunity, irrespective of antibody binding capacity. There is very little direct evidence, but some evidence suggesting a possible role of T cells is the fact that several vaccines, and it has been demonstrated and published, the Moderna, the Pfizer vaccine, also AstraZeneca, are showing effectiveness, or at least reduction of disease, at a very early stage after the first dose, a moment at which there are barely antibodies detectable. So that's an indirect evidence for possible other than antibody-mediated protection.
Yeah, I think that's important. Also, I think the point is that testing for antibodies is easy. Testing for CTLs is difficult. So that's why in reports, everybody talks about antibodies because it's straightforward, easy.
Absolutely.
Trying to find out if CTLs are there and doing their job, I think, is not easy. It's
Absolutely,
difficult.
that's a very cumbersome and costly procedure. You have to use either in vitro culture techniques to demonstrate antigen-specific T cells being there and also showing their activity.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it requires ELISpot assays or flow cytometry, which are costly, labor-intensive,
Yes.
etc. So much more difficult to handle than an ELISA.
Okay, thank you, Hit. Then I have a question for Susanna.
Вопрос профессору Kharit.
I will speak slowly so that we can translate easily. So with the vaccines, so we have Johnson and Johnson and AstraZeneca and Sputnik-V.
Sputnik-V.
So they're all adenovirus vectored vaccines. Okay, so we have heard in reports from Johnson and Johnson and AstraZeneca that there were some safety issues on thrombosis and also thrombocytopenia, so reduced number of thrombocytes. So from our side, one would expect that you would see the same with the Sputnik-V. Yes, are there some indications? Are there some cases? Also, the question is, of course, is there a kind of a monitor system to test it? Yeah, could you comment on that, please?
Вас не слышно, Сусанна Михайловна. Включите звук, пожалуйста.
Unmute, yeah.
Да, сейчас в порядке.
Yesterday I took part in an expert panel organized by AstraZeneca. And we had the data there about issues related to thrombocytes. After the adenovirus vaccines. As of today, officially, there are no cases of thrombosis-related diseases in China. And in Russia, such adverse events haven't been registered, neither. My colleagues also mentioned that every vaccine is registered on a state website, and every patient fills in a diary about his state after the vaccination on the site.
Okay.
That's why I think if such cases were the case, then the registration would indicate it.
Okay.
But
it's a new system of registration as of today.
Okay.
Officially, the recording of adverse events.
Okay. Okay.
Is based on the international documents. We have special recommendations on recording of adverse events. They are recorded through Rospotrebnadzor, and the clinic informs about it, the clinic that provided the vaccination.
Okay. So I hear that there, no. So I hear that there is I think that's nice to see that there's also a very strong follow-up of the patients. If something goes wrong, that you will find out that that there's a kind of a link with the vaccination. So I'm happy to hear that there's also a nice monitoring system in place to see if there is an adverse reaction that you will find out if there's a correlation with the vaccination. Thank you very much for your answer. Then
Спасибо большое.
I have for Irina, I have a question. It's more a practical question, because also in Belgium and also other European countries, there are we stimulate people and we try to get as many people vaccinated. I think that's not only here. The strategy, I think you have the same strategy in Russia. Yeah. Which people do you think are coming to the clinic to be vaccinated? Is there a kind of a group of people? And on the other hand, do you have also a kind of a group of people that you say they don't want to be vaccinated? Because we have also, in our area, we have, they call it the vaccinators, the ones that want to be vaccinated, and the anti-vaxxers that don't want to be vaccinated. I think when I saw your presentation, maybe you have the same problem. So the question is, can you define a little bit how the groups are, which the groups are, and what the reason is why, especially why they want to be vaccinated or why they don't want to vaccinate it? Is there a kind of a strategy from those people?
Да, действительно, у нас
Yes,
очень
indeed.
активно пациенты прививались.
Patients were actively vaccinated
В начале нашей
in the beginning of the vaccination period.
Сейчас очень много, к сожалению, людей.
Вас не слышно, Ирина.
Вы не могли повторить, пожалуйста, вас не было слышно?
А сейчас слышно?
Сейчас хорошо.
Когда мы только начинали вакцинацию против COVID-19,
In the beginning of vaccination, people were very eager to get a vaccine. We didn't even have to inform people that actively publish information on social media. Now we have to put a lot of effort to encourage the patients to get a vaccine, unfortunately. And a lot of information on social media doesn't correspond to the reality. There is, for instance, information about complications, that many people have to spend some time in a hospital after the vaccination. That is why we have to provide the correct information, persuade people. And even with doctors and nurses, people have this incorrect information. Unfortunately, a lot of people actively resist vaccination.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. We also have in our area some people that really don't want to be vaccinated, and that's of course a pity, because they will cause some problems in the future. They can cause some little groups of infection, and that's how, of course, the virus can remain in the population, and that's, of course, very dangerous. So what you tell is also, what we have in certain, especially in big cities, there are some groups that, have problems, because they don't want to be vaccinated. So we recognize the problems that you have. Then a question again, because we will do a little bit the tour. We will now go back to Kharit. So we will have holidays. July and August we have holidays, and of course some people in our area with some Russian roots want to go back to Russia. And then the point is, of course, if they want to go to Russia, if they have the opportunity there, I think they have to get vaccinated there as an expert. Would you stimulate that? Do you think that's good? Do you think that would be a strategy for the people that they get vaccinated there? And what will happen if they come back, of course? Can you give a kind of a comment on that?
I can give a comment, but yeah, it's the first place. It's a personal feeling, I think. From what I hear about the safety and the efficacy of the Russian vaccines, Sputnik-V, Covivac, they look quite safe and efficacious. So I don't see from an immunological point of view any problem. I would, however, be careful if a person living in Belgium goes to Russia, leaves Belgium having received one vaccine, let's say AstraZeneca or a Pfizer vaccine, then goes to Russia and has the opportunity to receive one of the Russian vaccines. I think as far as protection, this may be very good, but there may be legal issues in a way that that second vaccine may not be officially recognized, and ultimately the person may not get the so-called European vaccination passport. So apart from purely immunogenicity safety issues, there may be legal issues, but hopefully these will be resolved, because I read some information that studies of so-called mix and match are ongoing. For example, how safe and how efficacious is the combination of AstraZeneca first vaccine followed by a Sputnik-V vaccine. Studies are ongoing in Belarus, in Azerbaijan, and even also in Italy. So information from such studies will hopefully convince legislators to be more flexible in providing these corona vaccine passports. But for the time being, there may be especially legal and medical legal issues, but I think protection-wise, such combinations may well be acceptable.
And I think also that can be very interesting in case of shortage or some production problems with a certain vaccine, if we would know later on, based on the studies, that this mix and match strategy can be used.
For the time being now, for people asking for such a passport, a vaccination passport, you need to be vaccinated according to the appropriate protocol, meaning 2 doses for Pfizer, for Moderna, for AstraZeneca, and a single dose with the Johnson vaccine. That's considered a appropriate vaccination. But European countries may have themselves deviations, and I'm pretty sure, for example, Hungary will provide a certificate for their people vaccinated with 2 doses of Sputnik-V, because the vaccine is accepted and used in Hungary. But for the time being, well, the vaccine is not present in Belgium, and so I wonder if a person living, working in Belgium now goes to Russia to visit family or for other reasons, gets the second dose of Sputnik-V. There may be an issue right now, but hopefully not in the future.
Okay, that's clear. So people that want to go to Russia, maybe they will have 4 vaccinations instead of 2. But I think too many vaccination, I think that's not an issue. I think not enough vaccines, that's an issue, of course. Then I have a question to Susanna again. So we have the Sputnik-V, everybody knows, but they have also the other 2. The Epivac Corona, so that's the subunit. That's the subunit vaccine, and then the Covivac, that's the inactivated. Are there plans from the company to submit, to start registration in EMA, just like Sputnik-V? So Sputnik-V has been, submitted and it's in registration, I think, at this moment. So they're busy with that. But will the other 2 companies do the same?
Yes, with Sputnik it's the case, and with EMA there are all the documents available to register it in Europe. Now we're considering another plan of clinical trials for teenagers and in an earlier age, because it's a necessary condition for EMA, as it turned out, to consider all the documents to register the vaccine.
Okay. Then I have for Irina a question. So, because you gave, of course, numbers that you vaccinate, I think in your clinic, in a hospital. Here in Belgium, every evening we get a kind of during the news, the percentage of people that are vaccinated, the percentage of people that are infected, are taken up by the hospital and things like that. Do you have the same system in Russia for informing the people?
Daily updates.
No, we don't have such a system of informing the population. When the vaccination is completed, we send this data to the committee of the healthcare of our city.
Okay, that's clear.
We don't inform the population.
Okay, because that could be. I think it's always for us. It's a kind of a game at the end. If you put that on the news, and we feel comfortable that we see that the percentage of vaccinated people are just increasing. And I think it's giving the people a kind of a positive feeling. So just maybe to give you a kind of a hint, to get the people kind of mobilized to get vaccinated. Well, no, it's not pressure. It's a kind of a general population feeling, and it's a stimulus to get vaccinated. It's just telling you what we're doing, and maybe we can learn from each other, of course.
Возможно, это тоже может быть советом для вас. Yes, it's a good idea, but now this mechanism that encouraged the people to be vaccinated is the increase, is the information about the people who got the virus. It also influences the population.
Yes.
So when people know how many people are infected, they come more eagerly.
Okay. Yes. I think also important. We had a lot of pictures, and that's always very important. Pictures of patients in hospitals suffering a lot. Even patients telling in the camera their bad experience. Those things are really important to get the people moving towards vaccination. So in the beginning, I remember especially in Italy, those hospitals completely filled with patients. Then at that moment, I can tell you a lot of people were begging and asking for vaccinations. So those pictures are still important. We get them now a lot now from India and things like that. If you get those things on television, this is really stimulating to people really to get vaccinated. So I think also there, I fully agree with you that it is important to get also those patients in front of the camera and let them do some testimonies how tough it is, because those patients, it's not a cough for 1 week like some of the flus. It is those patients, there are a lot of patients for months for getting over the whole all the problems. So I fully agree that communication also by patients is a very important thing. Geert, again, so if we look to the world, do you think, because we have now vaccines coming, from UK, US, Russia, maybe China in the future, so you have vaccines produced all over the world. Do you think that we can use all those vaccines all over the world, or do you think that there will be some regions or some populations where you will have less efficacy with the vaccination, or do you think that the populations, wherever they are, will have a positive impact by really group vaccination?
Well, this is a tough question, but for the time being, what we see is that the vaccines that are being implemented, whether it is in the US or in Europe or South America, they all more or less give the same efficacy data. There are variations between the different vaccines, but I have no data suggesting that particular populations or ethnicities or racial subgroups or whatever respond less well to the vaccine. There's no evidence for that. So the simple message is get the vaccine to as many people as possible, and whatever safe vaccine is available, use it as soon as you can. I think that's the message. Get it spread all over the globe.
Yes. I think also, the vaccine is not that important. I think the vaccination strategy is, and really try to get everybody vaccinated. I think that's the most important message to give. Susanna, a question for you. You mentioned, if I was, following well, I'm a very good student, so I was following your presentation. You were talking about the efficacy of the Sputnik-V against the beta, so against the British variant, which was quite good. Eh? What you
Beta South African.
As the beta of South Africa, okay. So that was the beta I think you were talking about, eh? Yes. Do you know if the is there information about the other variants?
Есть ли какая-то информация о других вариантах? There's no official information on it.
Okay.
It's not published.
Okay, yeah. But maybe they're aware of that most probably, and they will try to get that also, answered, because they are very important questions, I think.
Хотят найти какой-то ответ, потому что это важный вопрос. I think those two other vaccines are not that spread in Russia.
Okay.
We're a little bit lagging on. In Europe, you have it more
Okay.
earlier.
What about, maybe that's a good point now, what about the Indian variant? Because that one is now in Belgium appearing, and is really, it looks like that one is really emerging now in Belgium. Is that also, do you find it already in Russia, or it's not yet detected?
Или еще нет? There are some reports on that, but the amount is not that big. It's just very few cases, mainly in Moscow, most likely due to the fact that a lot of people travel through Moscow.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Thank you for the clarification. Then for Irina, I have another question. It's a very old-fashioned way to look if a vaccine is, is doing its job, that is looking for a serological response.
Работает она или нет? Но есть также вариант посмотреть на нее в плане ответа.
Do you follow some patients? Is there a kind of a strategy that they say, you have to, for instance, take 1 out of 100 or to follow up of patients, or is the vaccination just the vaccination? I don't know if they even do it in Belgium. In Belgium, I think they just vaccinate and they don't follow up.
Например, пациенты получают вакцину в Бельгии, но потом он не проверяется никак. Как это происходит у вас?
У нас тоже не проводится тестирование в клинике.
Yes, we also don't have any tests after the vaccination to define whether the person develops antibodies. The patient themselves can go to the laboratories and report the results if they want to.
Okay.
But not a systemic one.
Yeah.
According to our information, among the patient that gave us the information after the vaccination, almost every patient had antibodies.
Okay.
I want to tell you one more thing. With those 1,400 people, 40,000 people, only 30 persons got a COVID infection, but in a very light form, so it's a very small percentage, so I think it's a very good result.
Okay. I think Geert wants to ask something.
I have a simple question for you, Irina. you showed that you have the 3 vaccines
Вы
available
сказали,
in your
что
center.
3 вакцины доступны в вашей поликлинике.
Can the people choose themselves,
Могут ли люди
or
сами
are
выбрать
you
вакцину,
selecting the
или вы
vaccine?
выбираете их самостоятельно?
Изначально пациентам дано такое право.
Initially, patients could choose the vaccine that they want.
Они даже могут заранее записаться на
They can even sign up in advance for a specific vaccine that they want to get. But in any case, when talking to the patient, when getting his anamnesis and some other illnesses, the decision is taken by the physician.
Но изначально они могут.
But initially, they can choose and sign up for some specific vaccine.
And just adding to that, is there any of the 3 vaccines more popular with the people than the other? Are people selecting one more than the other?
Бывает такое, что люди выбирают какую-то конкретную вакцину, что какая-то конкретная вакцина более популярна.
Да, особенно при появлении, при выходе новой вакцины, при появлении в городе, бывает пациент.
Yes, especially when a new vaccine comes out, the patients learn about it even quicker than we do. So sometimes they have their preferences.
Thank you.
Thank you. So here I got a question from one of the from out of the audience. That is the question is, why is the vaccine Sputnik-V not yet registered in the EU at this moment?
Well, I'm certainly not involved in the registration process, but Sputnik-V is undergoing what is called a rolling review. So the developers and the company creating and manufacturing Sputnik is providing information to the European authorities, information on production quality, safety, results, and I have the impression that the authorities are asking additional information from the Sputnik manufacturers, from the Gamaleya Institute, and I this week I read a short message that it will take at least another 3 months before a possible license will be given. But personally, I have no view on the stringency and the scrutiny that's ongoing.
Yes, yeah.
So it may take some more time. Now, this is not only an issue related to Sputnik-V. Yesterday, we were confronted with the news that the CureVac vaccine, the mRNA vaccine from the German company CureVac, is failing to reach a certain level of efficacy. And so this company will also have to provide additional information in order to get its product licensed eventually. And they may fail if they don't meet certain criteria. So this is a stringent, it's like an exam, and the student can provide more and more information. But I personally have no view on when Sputnik-V will ultimately reach the approval state.
Yeah. It's not a soft system, the EMA, so I think you have the requirements and you have to get over it. It has been the same system for the other vaccine producers, so you can answer the questions or not. So I think they have to go through the same tube canal, and hopefully at the end, and I don't see a reason why not, hopefully at the end it will be a green light. Susanna, I have a question for you also, because you have the luxury of the 3 vaccines. Is it allowed to combine vaccines?
Разрешено ли их
Mix and match.
комбинировать?
Yes, to have, for instance, vaccine 1
Например,
and then a kind of a second vaccine with the second one, or that's totally not
и
allowed?
совмещать ее со второй вакциной? Или это совсем не разрешено?
Нет, вопрос вот такого гетерогенного прайм-буста, он только обсуждается.
No, the question of such a prime boost is being in discussion. We should have some clinical trials.
Yes, but what is very important is if you use, of course, the adenovirus vector,
Но если вы
you will
используете
also
аденовирусный
induce
вектор,
antibodies against the vector.
вы также провоцируете появление
Daarom
антител
gebruiken ze
против
twee
вектора.
verschillende vectoren.
So for the future, if you continue to vaccinate with that vaccine, maybe the efficacy will go down. Whereas if you would use, I'm convinced if you would use your inactivated or your subunit, they're really antigen, and those ones could boost up. So because that's the next stage in the vaccination program, you know, what after the two vaccination, because that will come very fast, you know, so we are now busy, but by the end of the year they have to make decisions already about revaccinations, I think. Are you already busy with that? I think it would be nice to have already a discussion on that.
Было бы неплохо уже начать обсуждать этот вопрос.
Я уже говорила, что
I have told already,
предполагается возможность образования антител.
because there is a possibility of antibodies to adenovirus with just two different vectors.
И при этом обсуждается, естественно, что, по-видимому, для ревакцинации антивакцинации
And to revaccinate the population, and I think nobody doubts that it will be necessary.
возможно, будет более перспективно, например, использовать ковид.
Maybe it will be more efficient to use Covivac.
Yeah, because we have in our environment, we will have the same discussion. We have AstraZeneca and Johnson and Johnson. They're both adenovirus vectors, you know. So we should also have that question. Of course, the company will at this moment say, oh, but I think they have to start to show already that they can boost their immunity. And personally, I think if you then look to the mRNA vaccine, I think personally that will be easier to boost up the things with an mRNA vaccine than with a. This is of course theoretical, but I think they should already start thinking, and they should start doing it right now, because they should start doing some trials. So maybe I hope if somebody from Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca is listening, maybe they should start already. And maybe in Russia also you should start the discussion, because they're interesting questions, of course. And then I will stop with the last question. Thank you, Susanna. I have a last question for Irina. You know, the frequently asked questions. I'm always interested in that. What is in Russia the most frequently asked question?
Какой самый популярный вопрос в России?
By the patients, yes.
Which vaccine is better?
Okay, then we should close.
Vaccine is better. Welk vaccine is beter?
Ze mogen kiezen.
I think that's a very.
And can I also ask another question?
Okay, yeah, of course, no problem.
Да, пожалуйста. I want to ask you, those vaccines that you use in your country, are they registered after clinical trials in your country, or you just bought them and the clinical trials have already been conducted?
So the question is that the vaccines that are used in Belgium currently, they're used because the clinical trials were performed in Belgium, or because they were bought by Belgium based on clinical trials elsewhere?
Well, it's a mixed situation, but most of the vaccine purchase is, well, the Belgian buys the vaccines based on European tenders. It's the European community has placed orders for many millions of vaccines at different places. So I don't know the figures by heart, but it's hundreds of millions of the Pfizer vaccine, of Moderna vaccine, of AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. At the European level, price discussions were done, and Belgium gets a part of that order. Now, we locally here in Ghent, where we are, our unit has participated in some trials. We were participating as one of the many centers in the phase 3 trial of Johnson and Johnson, J&J. So there is some local involvement in clinical trials, but the majority of the data are generated elsewhere, and the decision to buy one vaccine and the other is certainly not made based on Belgian clinical studies.
Yes.
Может быть, перевести вам, Асмик Георгиевна, то есть профессор Leroux-Roels говорит, да, конечно, и даже в центре исследований, который здесь в Генте, центр вакцинологии, в котором он работает, проводились фаза 3 клинические испытания Johnson Johnson вакцины. И есть локальные бельгийские данные, но эти данные не были основой покупки вакцин. Покупки вакцин проводились не индивидуальной страной Бельгии, а организовывались европейским сообществом, так сказать, в общем, с распределением вакцин в странах участников европейского общества, сообщества. То есть это не индивидуальное решение Бельгии. И клинические испытания есть локальные дата, но в основном не бельгийские, а международная информация.
Okay. Do you have other questions? Because it's mutual, you know, it's bilateral.
Сусанна Михайловна, может быть, у вас к нам вопрос? Ирина Леонидовна?
А у нас тоже вопрос. Какой у вас самый популярный вопрос?
We have also another question. What question is the most popular with your patients in Belgium?
What question is the most popular with our patients?
But I think your question of what is the best vaccine, that's always discussion here, you know, because people are really discussing, you know, some people want to have that one, the other one wants to have that one. Yeah. And I was quite surprised that in Russia that you can choose, because in Belgium you cannot choose.
No.
So there are even a lot of people not very happy that they, you know, have been vaccinated with the vaccine that they didn't want. So I think in Russia you're lucky that you can choose there, you know. That's, I think, a big difference between our system and your system. But I feel that we have, let's say, similar problems to get those vaccinations in the people. Of course, we're pushing a lot, and I think, you know, that's the same what you do, and I appreciate it's not easy, of course, but I think you have to keep on going, because the whole globe should be vaccinated, and not only, let's say, the northern part, but we have to look also to the southern part, because there are a lot of problems down there, and I hope that we, you know, by combined forces, that we really can help a lot of people to be vaccinated, even by the end of this year. So if Europe is, you know, and also America, China most probably also, but if we have to look to Africa and also South America, I think there should be a lot of efforts to also try to get the people there vaccinated. So this will be an issue. I think it will not be this year. I think will be also next year to get everything. That will be a big challenge. So I would like to close the discussion, because we're already over time, and I think it's 1 hour later in Russia. So I think you should go to bed, I think, at this moment. So thank you very much, and I would like the speakers here, Susanna, Irena. So I would like to thank you, you know, especially for the open way you have presented all your results. We were very happy with what you did, and also with a very, you know, interactive and vivid discussion. So I really would like to thank you. Sometimes, you know, we want to be always physically together, but I think that's a positive thing from COVID-19. That is, you know, the digital connections that we have all over the world. So let's be positive from time to time too, you know. So I would like to thank you all, and I would say good evening, and maybe you should speak a little bit Russian now.
Да, конечно. Профессор Kharit, доктор Левченко и доктор Asatryan, огромное вам спасибо от всех нас здесь за ваши интересные презентации, за очень открытую дискуссию. Мы видим, что у нас общие вопросы и общие цели достижения вакцинации как можно в большем количестве населения во всем мире. И мы в этой битве против COVID-19 все вместе. Я также хочу поблагодарить всех русскоговорящих участников этого семинара за то, что из разных уголков планеты они присоединились к нам и участвовали. Огромное спасибо. И, конечно, скорее всего, мы встретимся еще, потому что эта ситуация, к сожалению, продолжает быть актуальной. Огромное спасибо и добрый вечер вам в Санкт-Петербурге.
Okay. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
evening.
Bye-bye.
Good evening. Good evening.
Nonne,
Ja,
dat lukte?
Ja,
Wat?
dat ging heel vlot.
ja.
Maar dat doe al hier aan mijn oren is hier, hè, man. Godverdomme.